Check sound. Hello everyone. Good evening everyone. Selamat sore semuanya. Selamat malam bagi yang berpuasa. Selamat berbuka puasa karena ini kan udah pukul 6:30 ya. Dan today will be a little bit different, a little bit unique than usual. Karena hari ini will not be playing games, but instead I will read you a book from Saint Augustine that is published by Penguin Classic, I think. It's the publisher, and the book title is called Confession by Saint Augustine. Jadi saya sini bakal lebih kayak ASMR-ish gitu. Jadi karena kan baca buku dan lebih kalem, lebih slow gitu. Nah, let's just start. Bagi yang mau ikut baca sambil dibacain, silahkan. I will add a text di sini tentang judul bukunya. Confession by Saint Augustine, published by Penguin Classic. There we go. There we go. And let me change the text color to something that can be easily read. Let's do purple. No, let's not do purple, let's do another color. Brighter color. Pink. Aku gak kelihatan animasiannya. Belakangnya putih. Okay. Let's do something kayak biru aja. Biru kelihatan ya? Bentar. Wait, you 1 second. Kita ketik dulu nih. Oh nih, background opacity dia dinyalain. There we go. Oke, ini judul bukunya ya, Confession by Saint Augustine. So, we will start from the very beginning, and then we'll see how long we can go until we finish today's session. Grab your tea with you, your cigarettes, anything. But yeah, my version yang aku beli itu hardcover because I love hardcover books. I love hardcover more than paperback because they feel solid, you know. And this book especially feels like a brick. You can show this to a person and they will pass out if you hit correctly. Anyway, here we go. Confession by Saint Augustine, translated with an introduction by R.S. Pine Coffin, Penguin Classic, an imprint of Penguin Book. Okay, contents, introduction, list of dates of event recorded in the confession, Book 1, Book 2, Book 3, Book 4, Book 5, Book 6, Book 7, Book 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. Oh banyak ya. So 13 books in total, 13 chapter. Today we're going to read the introduction and the first chapter of the book. So let me just copy this and paste duplicate sini, and then I'm going to change it to chapter introduction. There we go. Alright. Let me know if the music is too loud, so I can control it a bit. There we go. Should be better now. Right. Introduction. The life of Saint Augustine has a special appeal because he was a great sinner who became a great saint. And greatness is all the more admirable if it is achieved against odds. From his own account, we know that he lived a life of sin until the age of 32. And even after he was intellectually convinced of Christian truth, he was prevented from accepting the faith by weakness in dealing with sexual temptation. In the confession, he paints so black a picture of his past that the reader may easily lose sight of the good qualities which he certainly possessed as a young man. Whether he was a great sinner than others, living in the notorious city of Carthage, we cannot tell. But whatever his vices, they were not without compensating virtues. Some of the most striking passages in the book are those in which he writes of his mother, and it is clear that he was always a good and affectionate son, although he may not have appreciated Saint Monica's true worth until after his own conversion. On her deathbed, she told him that she had never heard him speak a harsh word against her. And this is not hard to believe, for whatever other sins he felt himself bound to confess, unkindness to others was not one of them. He showed unusual loyalty as well to the mistress whom he kept for so many years, and he was truly fond of Adeodatus, the son whom she bore him. Outside his own family, he also had a remarkable gift for making friends. This was in itself a danger, for as a boy it was his love of their company that led him to rob an orchard. Later, in adolescence, simply to win their admiration, he used to boast of sins which he had not committed, and it was most probably by their influence and example that he became a regular spectator at the theater, and learned to enjoy the cruel sport of the arena. Yet he did not always allow his friends to lead him into adventures which he would not have undertaken by himself. And it is a point in his favor that he refused to take part in the activities of rowdies who made it their business to scandalize newcomers to the schools at Carthage. And to this, the obvious fact that he was a serious and studious youth, and it becomes difficult to avoid the conclusion that the terms in which he writes of his sinful past are unnecessarily harsh. Perhaps his training as a teacher of rhetoric accounts for this. He was, after all, trying to make out a case against himself before an audience which was predisposed to believe him a saintly man. When he wrote the Confession, he already had a considerable reputation for sanctity, and one of the reasons why he wrote was to persuade his admirers that any good qualities he had were his by the grace of God, who had saved him so often from himself. Of all the sins which he wished to confess, there was one which was at the root of all the others. It was not an isolated act or a repeated habit, but a condition of mind which was a part of his life and provided him with a ready excuse for doing what his conscience told him to be wrong. For when as a young man, he became curious about the world and its origin, and started his search for truth. Instead of turning to God in a simple faith, he accepted the theories by which the Manichees explain away these problems. As a catechumen, he had received some instruction, but he had no clear idea of what Christians believed. As literature, the scriptures compared poorly with the police prose of Cicero, and he taught them to fit only for the simple-minded. He was so conceited to study them, and his reason could not accept the discrepancies and contradictions which he thought they contained. He could not account for the presence of evil in a world created by a God who was good, nor could he understand that God is a spiritual being. In his perplexity, he turned to the Manichees, whose specious reasoning seemed to supply the answer to these problems, as well as a system of moral which permitted the blame for sin to be cast elsewhere than on the sinner. The dangers of these beliefs were very present to Saint Augustine when he wrote the Confession, for it was only 10 or 12 years since he had escaped from them himself. In the meantime, he had written at least 5 books against the Manichees, and no man was better qualified to do so than himself. The Confessions, of course, cannot be considered as simply another work of controversy. They are far too personal for that. But as he wrote them, Saint Augustine was conscious above all else that the Manichees were wrong, and that only the mercy of God had saved him from this evil. He was only 18 when he first allied himself with the Manichees. Their founder, Manus, or Mani, a fanatic who regarded himself as Paraclete, had been crucified in Persia in 277. His religion spread rapidly both during and after his lifetime, and when Saint Augustine came under its influence a century later, there were groups of Manichees throughout the Roman world, especially in North Africa. By this time they were a proscribed sect and were obliged to practice their religion in secret, but numerically they were strong and in their doctrine, with various modifications, survived into the Middle Ages. Mainz did not entirely reject Christianity, but since he held that its teaching was only partially true, he supplemented it by borrowing from other religions and adding his own theories. He alleged that there were inconsistencies in the scriptures and that the text was corrupt and therefore untrustworthy. In particular, he denied the virgin birth and Christ's crucifixion, since the flesh was tainted with evil and any association with it was unworthy of God. This belief was derived from the fundamental doctrine of Manichaeism, which was that in the beginning there were 2 independent principles described as good and evil, or light and darkness. The evil power invaded the kingdom of the good power and in part captured it, so that the 2 become mixed. Matter was therefore composed partly of good and partly of evil, both being present in a given substance in a greater or smaller degree. Good and evil were permanently in conflict because the captive particle of good or light were always struggling to escape from the very few traces of the light element. The captive particles of good or light were always struggling to escape from the evil or darkness which enveloped them. In flesh of all sorts, very few traces of the light element were present, and for this reason meat was not to be eaten by a good Manassi. Light was present in greater quantities in vegetable matter, which could therefore be eaten. The light particles were freed from imprisonment when the elect or higher order of Manassis ate these foods, but it was wrong for a member of the sect to cut down a tree or even pluck a fruit, or to commit another act of violence harmful to the good elements in plants. These operations were to be performed by the wicked on behalf of the Manassis, that is, by those who were considered as lost souls and belonged to neither the higher nor the lower order of the sect. The elect were supposed to be particularly scrupulous and to avoid either doing violence to the good elements or taking any actions which might assist the power of darkness. They were forbidden to marry because the act of procreation was construed as collision with this power. For the lower order of the sect, called hearers or aspirants, the rules were less strict, but they were expected to serve the elect and to give food to no one but them, since to do so would be to deliver the good elements into the hands of the devil. It seems incredible that a man of St. Augustine's intellectual caliber could have been taken in by these fantastic theories, but the man is his plausible explanation of the problems of evil and his own inability to think God except as a material being combined to win him over. At first he was convinced by this argument and even influenced others to accept them. Although he never rose to a higher degree than that of an aspirant, he remained with the sect for nearly 10 years, during which he carried out the duties expected of its junior members. But before the end of this period, serious doubts had begun to trouble him. He was assured that Faustus, a leading figure among the Manassis, would still be able to solve and settle all his problems. But when this Solomon proved incompetent, he at length determined to remain a Manassi in name only, while he waited for something better to turn up. Once he had made this decision, his mind was open to other influence. He was introduced to the philosophy of the Neoplatonists, and their books helped him towards a conception of the spiritual nature of God. At the same time, he began to understand that evil results from a man's misuse of free will. This was the beginning of conversion. He listened with greater attention to the sermons of Saint Ambrose, to which he had first been attracted only by professional interest in the preacher's reputation as a fine speaker. He learned how to approach the scriptures and how to look for the spiritual meaning behind the literal sense. He went on to read St. Paul's epistle, where for the first time he heard of God's mercy and grace and learned to think of Christ as the Redeemer and no longer simply as specially gifted teacher. Finally, there came the decisive moment when the truth became so clear to him that he could no longer reject it. St. Augustine's decision to accept the faith is, of course, the central point of the confession. After it, he continues the narrative in order to include his baptism and the beginning of the return journey to Africa, during which his mother died. This takes us to the end of Book 9. But at this point, the biographical part of the book comes to an end. In Book 10, St. Augustine examines his ability at the time of writing books to deal with temptation in its various forms, and Book 11 to 13 are an exposition of the first chapters of Genesis. This apparent lack of cohesion between these two parts of the work had been the subject of much debate. Though it is generally agreed that Book 10 was a later interpolation instead of to satisfy readers who were naturally curious to know how the faith had changed St. Augustine's life. There is less agreement about this purpose of Books 9 until 13. The traditional explanation is that they are no more than an appendix, but this avoids the issue since appendixes are normally added for a definite purpose. Some commentators are content to point out that the first 9 books describe St. Augustine's search for the truth, while the last 3 contains his thoughts upon its meaning after he has found it. Others see a connection between the patterns of the Confession and St. Augustine's method for the introductions of the catechumens. In his works, De Catechizandis Rudibus, written only 4 or 5 years after the Confession, he suggests that the catechist should first point out to the convert that God has always taken good care of him, and proceed to instruct him in the scriptures, starting with the story of the creation. This plan of instruction clearly corresponds with the arrangement of the confessions, and the suggestion is that St. Augustine is applying the method to his own case in retrospect. Another view, more recently put forward, is that St. Augustine's original plan was to write a complete exposition of the faith as it is derived from the scripture, but found it too lengthy a task and abandoned it after he had dealt with the first chapter of Genesis. The story of his own early life and errors was intended merely as preamble. The evidence in support of this theory is taken chiefly from certain passages in the text where the author implies he is hastening to complete the narrative part of his work, in order to devote himself to other more important matters. Probably there is some truth in all these explanations, although it is hard to believe that the confessions as we have received them are only the beginning of a longer work, projected but never finished. Whatever his precise plan may have been, it is unlikely that St. Augustine would have been content merely to repudiate his early errors. His logical mind would require not only that falsehood should be demolished, but also that the truth should be made apparent. If he was to confess his errors, he must also confess the true belief for which he had renounced them, and the foundation of this was to be found in the book of Genesis. What better answer could be made to the Manichaean theory of the twin power of good and evil than God's own statement that he made heaven and earth, and that he saw what he had made and found it very good? St. Augustine was satisfied that this was all that was needed to reduce the fundamental principle of Manichaeism, absurdity. If this was how the work was planned, the pattern of the confession became clear. In the first place, it is a confession of the writer's sin and error. In the second, a recognition of God's goodness and truth. These two purposes are complementary, and the title of the book covers both. In the third place, because he has been saved from errors and the truth has been made clear to him, St. Augustine offers praise to God and thanks him for his mercy. He is led from confession of sin to confession of faith, and finally to confession of God's glory. The first words in the book, Magnus est Domine et laudabilis valde, are the key to the whole. There has been no lack of English translator of the confession. The first to attempt the task was Sir by Matthew, the courtier and diplomat, whose version was published anonymously and without imprint at St. Omer in 1620. It contained a long and controversial introduction to which the next translator, Willem Baat, rector of St. Albans, Wood Street, took objection on the ground that it was so errantly, partially popish. He began his own translation, which was published in London in 1630. As a Lenten devotion, he tells us, I quickly found it to exercise more than my devotion. It exercised my skill, all I had. It exercised my patience, it exercised my friends too, for 'tis incomparably the hardest task that I have ever undertook. Watts was followed by Abraham Woodhead, the Catholic writer who published a translation of the first 10 books in 1660. An anonymous version, now recognized as the work of Bishop Canelana, appeared in 1739. This also contained only books 1 to 10. Next came E.B. Pusey revision of Watts, published in 1838, which became the standard translation. Entirely new versions were produced in 1878 by W.H. Hutchings, books 1 to 10, and in 1877 by C. Bick, books 1 until 9. And in the last quarter of the century, to my knowledge, there have been at least 5 new translations, some of them published in the United States and not easily available in this country. Translators in other languages have also produced their quota. These facts alone are ample evidence of the continued and widespread interest in St. Augustine. For a few books have been translated so often into so many languages. In preparing this translation, I decided at the outset to use you rather than thou. Although the confession, as might be expected, are written in the form of prayer, it seemed to me that in a work of this length it would merely be tiresome to retain the conventional usage. For the sake of consistency, I have also taken the liberty of changing thou to you in the quotation from the scriptures. These are from the Knox version and are printed in italics. I have also modified the English text of Knox within strict limits wherever Saint Augustine modifies the Latin text. That is, wherever he omits a phrase or adds words of his own. Some transposition of words in the English text has also been necessary for grammatical reasons, because St. Augustine frequently combines passages from scriptures not only with one another, but also with sentences of his own. In a small number of cases, it has been impossible to quote the Knox version, and I have had to content myself with giving the appropriate references. The reasons for this are several. Too much stress need not be laid upon the first of them, which is that the text from which the saint quotes, presumably from memory, is earlier than the Latin version of St. Jerome. This accounts for some variations in wording. In the second place, while it may be grammatically possible to combine two or more sentences as they are written in one language, it does not necessarily follow that they can be combined the very same way once they have been translated independently into another idiom. Yet again, the number of cases is small. Thirdly, in a few passages, the meaning which St. Augustine elicits from the sacred text does not correspond with that given in the Knox. The most obvious example is his interpretation of Genesis 1 and 2, see books 9 and 11, see book 11 and 12. He may sometimes have been misled by an ambiguous Latin version. For whereas Knox translated from the Vulgate in the light of the Hebrew and the Greek originals, St. Augustine is known to have had a profound distaste for Greek, and it is very doubtful whether he had knowledge of Hebrew. Dates of events recorded in the Confession. All of it is in AD 354, 13 November, birth of Saint Augustine in Tagaste, now South Ahras, south of Bone in Algeria. He has at least one brother, Navigius, and 2 sisters, whose names are not recorded. His father, Patricius, a small landowner and official of the local government, is still a pagan. But Monica, his mother, is a devout Christian. 365 until 369 at school at Madaura, now Madauroch, about 20 miles from Tagast. 369 until 370 is he spent a year at home while his father saved money to send him to Carthage. 370 is conversion of Patricius. 371 to 374 is Augustine's studies at Carthage. 371 is death of Patricius. 372 is birth of Augustine's son Deodatus. 375 is Augustine teaching rhetoric at Tagast. 376 until 383 is teaching in Carthage. 383 is the voyage to Rome. 384 Augustine goes to Milan as professor of rhetoric and meet Ambrose. 385 is Monica arrives in Milan. 386 February the persecution of Justina. June discovery of the bodies of martyrs Gervasius and Protasius. July Augustine talk with Simplicianus. August the episode in the garden and Augustine confession. He goes to Cassiciacum, now Cassago in Brianza near Como. March he returns to Milan. 24 April Holy Saturday baptism of Augustine, Alivius and Adeodatus. Autumn the journey to Ostia and the death of Monica. At this point the narrative part of the confessions ends. After his mother died, Augustine spent some months in Rome, returning to Tagast in August 388. In the following year, Adeodatus died. By now, Augustine was living a monastic life, devoting himself to study and writing. In 391, he visited Hippo, now Bone, and was persuaded by the bishop, Valerius, to offer himself for ordination. This meant that he had to leave the community at Tagast, but he was permitted to found a new monastery near Hippo. In 396, he was consecrated assistant bishop of Hippo to ADH Valerius, who died a year later. The care of the diocese now fell upon Augustine and was to occupy him fully for the rest of his life. Besides his pastoral work, Augustine was a powerful adversary of all heretics and enemies of the church. Much of his prodigious literary output was devoted to this cause. But the importance of the Confessiones, written in 397 until 398, is as a personal document and statement of faith. In 410 came the sack of Rome by Alaric and the Goths. This was the occasion which inspired Augustine to write City of God, De Civitate Dei. His great work in 22 books began in 413 and completed in 426. The fall of the city after 1,000 years, during which no foreign invader had penetrated its walls, was attributed by many to loss of faith in the pagan gods, whose cult had recently been largely suppressed by the joint emperors Gratian and Theodosius. The disaster was hailed as a direct consequence of the spread of Christianity, and this challenge was a challenge which Augustine could not ignore. After disproving the claim that the prosperity of man depended upon the propitiation of a miscellaneous array of gods, he went on to define the Christian answer to the religious, philosophical, and political problems of the world and its government. The Confession and the City of God rightly belong to the great literature of the world. Augustine's numerous other works are read chiefly by theologians and scholars. In addition to a great many letters and sermons, of which about 500 have been preserved, he wrote books on theology and philosophy, controversial works against the Manichees, Donatists, and Pelagians, and works of biblical exegesis. In 428, the Vandals invaded North Africa, and Hippo was under siege from May 430 to July 431. In the fourth month of the siege, on 28 August 430, Augustine died. In 497, when the Arian king of the Vandals, Thrasamund, forced the bishops to leave Numidia, they carried Augustine remains with them to Sardinia. The island was repeatedly raided by the Saracens in the 8th century and during the incursions of 721 to 722. To save the body from desecration, Liutprand, king of the Lombards, sent envoys to ransom it. They brought it to Pavia in northern Italy, where it was reinterred in the monastery of San Pietro in Ciel d'Oro. Now let's take a small break before continuing to book 1. Alright, book 1. Can any praise be worthy of the Lord's majesty? How magnificent his strength, how inscrutable his wisdom. Man is one of your creatures, Lord, and his instinct is to praise you. He bears about him the mark of death, the signs of his own sin, to remind him that you too art the proud. But still, since he is part of your creation, he wished to praise you. The thought of you stirs him so deeply that he cannot be content unless he praises you. Because you made us for yourself, and our hearts find no peace until they rest on you. Grant me, Lord, to know and understand whether a man is first to pray to you for help or to praise you, and whether he must know you before he can call you to his aid. If he does not know you, how can he pray to you? Or he may call for some other help, mistaking it for you. Or are men to pray to you and learn to know you through their praise? Only how are they to call upon the Lord until they have learned to believe in him? And how are they to believe in him without a preacher to listen to? Those who look for the Lord will cry out in the praise of him, because all who look for him shall find him. And when they find him, they will praise him. I shall look for you, Lord, by praying to you, and as I pray, I shall believe in you. Because we have had preachers to tell us about you. It is my faith that calls to you, Lord, the faith which you gave me and made to live in me through the merits of your Son, who became man, and through the ministry of your preacher. How shall I call upon my God for aid when the call I make is for my Lord and my God to come into myself? What place is there in me to which my God can come? What place that can receive the God who made heaven and earth, Does this then mean, O my Lord, my God, that there is in me this thing fit to contain you? Can even heaven and earth, which you made and in which you made me, contain you? Or since nothing that exists could exist without you, does this mean that whatever exists does, in this sense, contains you? If this is so, since I too exist, why do I ask you to come into me? For I should not be there at all unless in this way you were already present within me. I am not in hell, and yet you are there too. For if I sink down to the world beneath, you are present still. So then I should be null and void and could not exist at all, if you, my God, were not interested in me. Or is it rather that I should not exist until I existed in you? For all things find in you their origin, their impulse, the center of their being. This, Lord, is the true answer to my question. But if I exist in you, how can I call upon you to come to me? And where would you came from? For you, my God, have I said that you fill heaven and earth. But I cannot go beyond the bounds of heaven and earth, so that you may leave them to come to me. Do heaven and earth then contain the whole of you, since you fill them, or when once you have filled them, is some part of you left over because they are too small to hold you? If this is so, when you have filled heaven and earth, does that part of you which remains flow over into some other place? Or is it that you have no need to be contained in anything, because you contain all things in yourself, and fill them by reason of the very fact that you contain them? For the things which you fill by containing them do not sustain and support you as a waterless vessel supports the liquid which fills it. Even if they were broken to pieces, you would not flow out of them anyway. Even if they are broken to pieces, you would not flow out of them anyway. And when you pour yourself out over us, you are not drawn down to us, but drawn us up to yourself. You are not scattered away, but you gather us together. You fill all things, but do you fill them with your whole self? Or is it that the whole of creation is too small to hold you, and therefore holds only a part of you? And is this same part of you present in all things at once? Or do different things contain different parts of you, greater or smaller according to their size? Does this mean that one part of you is greater and another is smaller? Or are you present entirely everywhere at once, and no single things contain the whole of you? What then is the God I worship? He can be none but the Lord God Himself. For who but the Lord is God? What other refuge can there be except our God? You, my God, are supreme, utmost in goodness, mightiest and all-powerful, most merciful and most just. You are the most hidden from us and yet the most present among us, the most beautiful and yet the most strong, ever enduring and yet we cannot comprehend you. You are unchangeable, and yet you change all things. You are never new, never old, and yet all things have new life from you. You are unseen power that brings decline upon the proud. You are ever active, yet always at rest. You gather all things to yourself, though you suffer no need. You support, you fill, and you protect all things. You create them, nourish them, and bring them to perfection. You seek to make them your own, though you lack for nothing. You love your creatures, but with a gentle love. You treasure them, but without apprehension. You grieve for wrong, but suffers no pain. You can be angry and yet serene. Your works are varied, but your purpose is one and the same. You welcome all who come to you, though you never lost them. You are never in need, yet are glad to gain. Never covetous, yet you exact a return for your gifts. We give abundantly to you so that we may deserve a reward. Yet which of us has anything that does not come from you? You repay us what we deserve, and yet you owe nothing to any. You release us from our debts, but you lose nothing thereby. You are my God, my life, my holy delight. But is this enough to say of you? Can any man say enough when he speaks of you? Yet woe betide those who are silent about you, for even those who are most gifted with speech cannot find words to describe you. Let's take a little break. Now let's continue again. Who will grant me to rest content in you? To whom shall I turn for the gift of your coming into my heart and filling it into the brim, so that I may forget all the wrongs I have done and embrace you alone, my only source of good? Why do you mean so much to me? Help me to find words to explain. Why do I mean so much to you that you should command me to love you? And if I fail to love you, you are angry and threaten me with great sorrow, as if not to love you were not sorrow enough in itself. Have pity on me and help me, O Lord my God. Tell me why you mean so much to me. Whisper in my heart. I am here to save you. Speak so that I may hear your word. My heart has ears ready to listen to you, Lord. Open them wide and whisper in my heart, I am here to save you. I shall hear your voice and make haste to clasp you to myself. Do not hide your face away from me, for I would gladly meet my death to see it, since not to see it would be death in itself. My soul is like a house, small for you to enter, but I pray you to enlarge it. It is in ruins, but I ask you to remake it. It contains much that you will not be pleased to see. This I know and do not hide. But whom is to rid it of these things? There is no one but you whom I can say, if I have sinned unwittingly, do you absolve me. Keep me ever your own servant, far from pride. I trust, and in trusting I find words to utter. Lord, you know that this is true, for have I not made my transgression known to you? Did you not remit the guilt of my sin? I do not wrangle with you for judgment, for you are the truth itself, and I have no wish to delude myself, for fear that my malice should be self-betrayed. Now I do not wrangle with you, for if you, Lord, will keep record of our iniquities, Master who has strength to bear it. But dust and ashes though I am, let me appeal to your pity. Since it is you in your mercy that I speak, not to a man who would simply laugh at me. Perhaps you too may laugh at me, but you will relent and have pity on me. For all I want to tell you, Lord, is that I do not know where I came from when I was born to this life which leads to death, or should I say this death which leads to life. This much is hidden from me. Although I do not remember it all myself, I know that when I came into the world, all the comforts which your mercy provides were ready for me. This I was told by my parents, the father who begat me and the mother who conceived me, the two from whose bodies you formed me in the limits of time. So it was that I was given the comfort of a woman's milk. But neither my mother nor my nurses filled their breasts of their own accord, for it was you who used them as your law prescribes, to give me infants food and share of the riches which you distribute even among the very humblest of all created things. It was also by your gift that I do not wish for more than you gave, and that my nurses gladly pass on to me what you gave to them. They did this because they loved me in the way that you had ordained, and their love made them anxious to give to me what they had received in plenty from you. For it was to their own good that what was good for me should come to me from them, though of course it did not come to me from them, but through them from you, because you, my God, are the source of all good, and everywhere you preserve me. All this I have learned since then, because all the gifts you have given to me, both spiritual and material, proclaim the truth of it. But in those days, all I knew was how to suck, and how to lie when my body sends comfort, or cry when it feels pain. Later on, I began to smile as well, first in my sleep, and later when I was awake. Others told me this about myself, and I believe what they say. Because we see other babies do the same, but I cannot remember it myself. Little by little, I began to realize where I was, and to want to make my wishes known to others who might satisfy them. But this I could not do because my wishes were inside me, while other people were outside, and they had no faculty which could penetrate my mind. So I would toss my arms and legs and bow and make noises, hoping that such few signs as I could make would show my meaning, though they were quite unlike what they were meant to mine. And if my wishes were not carried out, either because they had not been understood or because what I wanted would have harmed me, I would get cross with my elders, who were not at my beck and call, and with people who were not with servants, and who were not my servants, simply because they did not attend to my wishes. And I would take my revenge by bursting into tears. By watching babies, I have learned that this is how they behave. And they quite unconsciously have done more than those who brought me up and knew all about it to convince me that I behave in just the same way myself. My infancy is long since dead, yet I am still alive. But you, Lord, live forever, and nothing in you dies, because you have existed from the very beginning of the ages, before anything that could be said to go before. And you are God, and Lord of all you have created. And you are the first causes of all things not eternal, the unchangeable origins of all things that suffer change, the everlasting reasons of all things that are subject to passage of time and have no reasons in themselves. Have pity then on me, O God, for it is pity that I need. Answer my prayer, and tell me whether my infancy followed upon some other stage of life that died before it. Was it the stage of life that I spent in my mother's womb? For I have learned a little about that too, and I have myself seen women who were pregnant. What came before that, O God, my delight? Was I anywhere? Was I anybody? These are questions I must put up to you, for I have no one else to answer them. Neither my father nor my mother could tell me, nor I could find them from the experience of other people, or from my own memory. To my question, acknowledge you, to smile at me and bid me, simply to acknowledge you and praise you for what I do know. I do acknowledge you, Lord of heaven and earth, and I praise you for my beginnings. Although I cannot remember them, but you have allowed men to discover these things about themselves by watching other babies, and also to learn much from what women have to tell. I know that I was living I was a living person even at that age, and as I came towards the end of infancy, I tried to find signs to convey my feelings to others. Where could such a living creature come from if not from you, O Lord? Can it be that any man has skill to fabricate himself? Or can there be some channel by which we derive our life and our very existence from some other source than you? Surely we can only derive them from our Maker, from you, Lord, to whom living and being are not different things. Since infinite life and infinite being are one and the same, for you are infinite and never change. In you today never comes to an end, and yet our today does come to an end. In you, because time as well as everything else exists in you. If it did not, it would have no means of passing. And since your years never come to an end, for you they are simply today. The countless days of our life and of our forefathers' life have passed by within your today. From it they have received their due measures of durations and their very existence. And so it will be with all the other days which are still to come. But you yourself are eternally the same. In your today you will make all that is to exist tomorrow and thereafter. And in your today you have made all that exists yesterday and forever before. Need it concern me if some people cannot understand this. Let them ask what it meant. And be glad to ask, but they may content themselves with the question alone. For it is better for them to find you and leave the question unanswered than to find the answer without finding you. We will take a short break. Hear me, O God. How wicked are the sins of men. Men say this and you pity them, because you made man, but you did not make sin in him. Who can recall to me the sins I committed as a baby? For in your sight no man is free from sin, not even a child, who has lived only one day on earth. Who can show me what my sins were, some baby in whom I can see all that I do not remember about myself? What sin then did I commit when I was a baby myself? Was it a sin to cry when I wanted to feed at the breast? I am told now to feed on mother's milk, but if I were to cry for the kind of food suited to my age, others would rightly laugh at me, to scorn and remonstrate with me. So then too I deserved a scolding for what I did, but since I could not have understood the scolding, it would have been unreasonable and most unusual to rebuke me. We root out these faults and discard them as we grow up. And this is proof enough that they are faults, because I have never seen a man purposely throw out the good when he clears away the bad. It can hardly be right for a child, even at that age, to cry for everything, including things which would harm him. To work himself into a tantrum against people older than himself and not required to obey him. And to try his best to strike and hurt others who knew better than he does, including his own parents when they do not give in to him and refuse to pander to whims which would only do him harm. This shows that if babies are innocent, it is not for the lack of will to do harm, but for the lack of strength. I have myself seen jealousy in a baby and know what it means. He was not enough to talk, but whenever he saw his foster brother at the breast, he would grow pale with envy. This much is common knowledge. Mothers and nurses say that they can work such things out of the system by one means or another, but surely it cannot be called innocence when the milk flows in such abundance from its source to object to a rifle desperately in need and depending for his life on this one form of nourishment. Such faults are not small or unimportant, but we are tender-hearted and bear with them because we know that the child will grow out of them. It is clear that they are not more peccadillos, because the same faults are intolerable in older persons. You, O Lord, my God, give me my life and my body when I was born. You gave my body its 5 senses, you furnished it with limbs and gave its proper proportions, and you implanted in all the instinct necessary for the welfare and safety of a living creature. For these gifts you command me to acknowledge you and praise you and sing in honor of your name. Because you are Almighty God, because you are good, and because I owe you praise for these things. Even if you had done nothing else, no one but you can do these things. Because you are the one and only mold in which all things are cast, and the perfect form which shaped all things. And everything takes place according to your law. I don't remember that early part of my life, O Lord, but I believe what other people have told me about it, and from watching other babies I can conclude that I also live as they do. But true to my conclusion may be, I do not like to think of that period as a part of the same life I now lead, because it is dim and forgotten, and in this sense it is not different from the time I spent in my mother's womb. But if I was born in sin and guilt, it was with me already when my mother conceived me. Where I ask you, Lord, where or when was I, your servant, ever innocent? But I will say no more about that time, for since no trace of it remains in my memory, it needs no longer concerns me. The next stage in my life as I grew up was boyhood, or would it be true to say that boyhood overtook me and followed my infancy? Not that my infancy left me, for if it did, where did it go? All the same time, it was no longer there, because I ceased to be baby, unable to talk, and was now a boy with the power of speech. I can remember that time, and later on I realized how I had learned to speak. It was not my elders who showed me the words by some set system of instruction in the way that they taught me to read not long afterwards, but instead I taught myself by using the intelligence which you, my God, gave to me. For when I tried to express my meaning by crying out and making various sounds and movements so that my wishes should be obeyed, I found that I could not convey all that I meant, or make myself understood by everyone whom I wished to understand me. So my memory prompted me. I noticed that people name some object and then turn towards whatever it was that they had named. I watched them and understood that the sounds they made when they wanted to indicate that particular things was the same which they gave to it, and their actions clearly show that what they meant, for there is a kind of universal language, consisting of expressions of the face and eyes, gestures and tones of voice, which can show whether a person means to ask for something and get it, or refuse it and have nothing to do with it. So by hearing words arranged in various phrases and constantly repeated, I gradually pieced together what they stood for. And when my tongue had mastered the pronunciations, I began to express my wishes by means of them. In this way, I made my wants known to my family and then made theirs known to me. And I took a further step into the stormy life of human society, and although I was still subject to the authority of my parents and the will of my elders. But oh God, my God, I now went through a period of suffering and humiliation. I was told that it was right and proper for me as a boy to pay attention to my teachers, so that I should do well at my study of grammar and get on in the world. This was the way to gain the respect of others, and win for myself what passes for wealth in this world. So I was sent to school to learn to read. I was too small to understand what purpose it might serve, and yet, if I was idle at my studies, I was beaten for it, because beating was favored by tradition. Countless boys, long since forgotten, had built up this stony path for us to tread, and we were made to pass along with it, adding to the toil of sorrow of the sons of Adam. But we found that some men prayed to you, Lord, and we learned from them to do the same, thinking of you in the only way that we could understand, as some great person who could listen to us and help us. Even though we could not see you or hear you or touch you, I was still a boy when I first began to pray to you. My help and refuge I used to prattle away to you. And though I was small, my devotion was great when I begged you to not let me be beaten at school. Sometimes, for my own good, you did not grant me my prayers. And then my elders and even my parents, who certainly wished me no harm, would laugh at the beating I got. And those days, beating were my one great bugbear. O Lord, throughout the world, men beseech you to preserve them from the rack and the hook and various similar tortures which terrify them. Some people are merely callous. But if a man clings to you with great devotion, how can his piety inspire him to find in his heart to make light of these tortures, when he loves those who tread them so fearfully? And yet this was how our parents scoffed at the torments which we boys suffered in the hands of our masters, for we feared the whip just as much as others feared the rack, and we, no less than they, begged you to preserve us from it. But we sinned by reading and writing and studying less than what was expected of us. We lacked neither memory nor intelligence, because by your will, O Lord, we had as much of both as was sufficient for our years. But we enjoyed playing games and were punished for them by men who played games themselves. However, grown-up games are known as businesses, and even though boys' games are much the same, they are punished for them by their elders. No one pities either the boys or the men. Though solely we deserve pity, for I cannot believe that a good judge would approve of the beatings I received as a boy on the grounds that my games delayed my progress in my studying subjects, which would enable me to play a less creditable game later in life. Was the master who beat me himself very different from me? If he were worsted by a colleague in some petty argument, he would be convulsed with anger and envy, much more so than I was when a playmate beat me at a game of ball. We will take a break. And yet I sin, O Lord my God, creator and arbiter of all natural things, but arbiter only, not creator of sin. I sin, O Lord, by disobeying my parents and the masters of whom I have spoken for. For whatever purposes they had in mind, later on I might have put to good use all things which they want me to learn. I was disobedient, not because I chose something better than they proposed to me, but simply from the love of games. For I like to score, find win at sport, or to have my ears tickled by the make-believe of the stage, which only made them itch the more. As time went on, my eyes shone more and more with the same eager curiosity, because I wanted to see the shows and sports which grown-up enjoyed. The patrons who pay for the production of these shows are held in esteem, such as most parents would wish for their children. Yet the same parents willingly allow their children to be flogged if they are distracted by this display from the studies, which are supposed to fit them to grow rich and give the same sorts of shows themselves. Look on these things with pity, O Lord, and free us who now call upon you from such delusion. Set free also those who have not yet called upon you, so that they may pray to you and you may free them from this folly. Alright guys, I think we will stop here this book and we will continue at a later time. Alright, everyone, thank you very much for coming. We will stop by at book 1, chapter 10, and then we will continue to finish the book in the near future, because we are halfway through book 1. Book 1 has 20 chapter. Alright, now thank you everyone for coming by and listening to me telling you me reciting this book to you guys. I hope it have been enjoyable to you all, and I hope I was able to entertain you guys for this evening. Alright, I'll see you guys some other time. Cheers and goodbye.